Whatever the founding fathers imagined politics would look like 250 years later, I can tell you one thing. This is not it.
How many of Epstein's co-conspirators have you indicted? How many perpetrators are you even investigating?
First, you showed it. I find it.
How many have you indicted?
Excuse me. I'm going to answer the question.
Answer my question.
No, I'm going to answer the question the way I want to answer the question.
No,
Your
you're going to answer
theatrics
the
are
question
ridiculous.
the way I asked it.
You can let her filibuster all day long, but not on our watch.
clear,
And I told you about that, Attorney General, before you started.
You don't tell me
Yeah, I
anything,
did tell you because we saw what you did in the Senate.
Lawyer, not even a lawyer. You know, with this anti-Semitic culture right now, she voted against a resolution condemning.
Oh,
is
Jewish.
I just want to be clear.
Do you want to go there, Attorney General? Or do you want to go there? Are you serious? Talking about anti-Semitism to a woman who lost her grandfather in the Holocaust? Really?
So that's Donald Trump's Attorney General Pam Bondi taking an absolute beating in front of the House Judiciary Committee today. And with her being the head of the Trump Justice Department, the topic that everyone grilled her on was Jeffrey Epstein. Though it seems like that may not be clear to Bondi because almost every time someone asked her about it, she deflected to something else, be it the Democrats, illegal immigrants, deep fake porn, or that Ukrainian refugee stabbed on a train last August.
You know, instead of talking about Ghislaine Maxwell, who hopefully will die in prison, you should be talking about Irina Zarutska.
I have a couple
who died on a subway.
Now with that, she tried to make it out like Trump's been the one that's actually been pushing to release the files.
This has been around since the Obama administration. This administration released over 3 million pages of documents, over 3 million, and Donald Trump signed that law.
Though that, of course, it flies in the face of almost an entire year of feet-dragging, lies, distractions, and countless deployments of the word hoax that we all witnessed. They think you're stupid. They think you have the memory of a goldfish. But then also you had Bondi arguing that nobody asked all these questions when Biden's Attorney General was on the stand, and the Democrats, they actually only care about Epstein now because they want to distract from Trump's stock market.
The Dow is over $50,000. I don't know why you're laughing. You're a great stock trader, as I hear, Raskin. The Dow is over 50,000 right now. The S&P at almost 7,000. We should be talking about, what does a Dow have to do with anything? That's what they just asked. Are you kidding?
Now that, of course, it flies in the face of numerous economic indicators, inflation, jobs numbers, debt, health insurance premiums, as well as Trump's dismissal of polling on economic performance. But he's been out there saying that if you don't like the economy, you're essentially crazy, that affordability, it's a Democratic hoax. Not that, again, any of this is relevant to Epstein. And also, I know we've just collectively forgotten this, but Pam Bondi is not a political operative. She is the Attorney General. Like, I know Trump destroyed, killed, drowned norms in a bathtub, but her role is supposed to be nonpartisan, non-political, independent from the White House. And so for anyone who remembers what American politics was just like a couple of years ago, seeing America's top lawyer glaze Trump from head to toe is kind of wild. Not surprising, but just wild. But anyway, going back to Epstein, a group of his victims were actually there at the hearing, and Pramila Jayapal had them stand up and then said,
"And if you are willing, please raise your hands if you have still not been able to meet with this Department of Justice. Please know for the record that every single survivor has raised their hand."
Also, at another point after Bondi licked Trump's toes on national television a little more and claimed that there's no evidence he's committed any crimes, Ted Lieu leveled this serious accusation at her.
I believe you just lied under oath. There is ample evidence in the Epstein file.
Don't you ever accuse me of a crime.
I believe you just lied under oath, and this is all on videotape. You said there's no evidence of a crime. I'm showing you, here is a witness statement who called into the FBI's Threat Operations Center. He drove Donald Trump around in a limo. He overheard what Donald Trump said to Jeffrey on his cell phone. He was so angry, he was gonna stop a limo and hurt Donald Trump. And he met a girl who said she was raped by Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein. She later had her head blown off, and officers at the scene said that could not have been suicide.
But you also had Thomas Massie, who's been leading the charge on the release of the Epstein files with Rogan, calling her out first for accidentally publishing the names of victims and then for redacting the names of implicated men.
To my right is an email that was sent by the victims' lawyers to the DOJ. It was a list of names not to redact, a list of names not to release. What did the DOJ do with this email? They released this email in the document production. Literally the worst thing you could do to the survivors.
Then you had Massie pulling up another document referring to co-conspirators in sex trafficking, and he noted that while billionaire Les Wexner's name was found in other parts of the files, it was redacted there. Right, and while Wexner's name was unredacted after Massie called it out earlier in the week, today he got to directly confront Bondi about it. Though she, to really no one's surprise, just brushed it off.
Who in your organization made this massive failure and released the victims' names? Are you able to track who it was that obscured Les Wexner's name as a co-conspirator in an FBI document? Do you have that kind of accountability?
I believe Wexner's name was listed more than 4,000 times.
Yeah, I already told you that.
You're acting like everybody's trying to cover up Wexner's name.
Reclaiming my time.
I'm going to answer this question.
Reclaiming my time.
Mr.
Chairman.
This is how this works. Within 40 minutes, Wexner's name was added back.
Within 40 minutes of me catching you red-handed.
There was one redaction out of
he's
over
listed as a co-conspirator.
4,700.
And so with all this, unsurprisingly, especially if you watched the whole thing, you've had some slamming Bondi not only for not answering questions, but some even calling for her to be held in contempt of Congress. But also, the DOJ, they're not the only department that has a problem with the abuse of children, right? Because Homeland Security has now been accused of zip tying dozens of kids during a raid in October on a horse racing track in Idaho. Now, officially, they were targeting an alleged gambling ring with some 300 US citizens and 100 undocumented immigrants getting taken into custody. But only 5 people were actually arrested for the gambling ring, all on nonviolent offenses. And now you have the ACLU alleging in a lawsuit that the whole thing was just a cover for an immigration raid, describing how in the process of rounding people up and herding them onto the racing track, federal agents smashed car windows where children had taken refuge from a chilly rain. One 8-year-old boy saying that he had to pick tiny shards of glass out of his mouth. Other kids adding that guns were pointed at them, more recalling rubber bullets whizzing over their heads. And according to the lawsuit, multiple kids were zip-tied, leaving welts and bruises on the wrist, including a 14-year-old girl seen in this photo. Now, both Trump's DHS and the local FBI office have flat out denied that any kids were zip-tied, but later you had some FBI officials clarifying that no young children were zip-tied. But then you also had local police acknowledging that, in fact, yes, minors had been zip-tied. And this week, you had CBS News confronting the sheriff who led the raid, and also just to give you an idea of his character, he did the operation on horseback and describes himself as a cowboy. But anyway, he essentially played the playbook, right? At first, he denied it, and when they fact-checked him right there on the spot, he just tried to justify it.
There were kids in there. They weren't zipped. Those little ones were not zip-tied.
This is a picture of Suhey. We met her this morning. She's 14 years old.
Okay.
She's I would say, a child, a girl who was zip-tied, and these are the bruises from those zip ties.
Okay. And
Have you seen that or heard?
No, I had not. I had not seen that. But I will tell you this. I've been in this business a long time. I've gone against gang members who are a lot younger than that.
She was with her 6-year-old brother and 8-year-old sister.
But you're taking that out of context. We do not know her.
What kind of context do you need? There's a young girl with 2 small children with her. How dangerous could she possibly be?
We don't know.
But that's only one of many cases where the authorities were caught lying, which actually, speaking on that, we've got to dive into these revelations about Marimar Martinez. Right? And we talked about her in depth last week. She's the woman who survived being shot by Border Patrol 5 times while she was following them in her car.
I could hear my back passenger window shattered. I looked down and I noticed blood gushing out of my arms and legs.
And with that, you had the agents claiming afterward that she rammed their car, and Martinez, she claimed the opposite. She said they sideswiped her before getting out and shooting. And well, now we have the body cam footage from that incident, and it doesn't appear to back up the agent's story. Right? It starts with them and their vehicle, protesters honking at them, and then they say,
"It's time to get aggressive and get the out, because they're trying to box us in. We're gonna make contact and we're boxed in."
Then the driver, Charles Exum, appears to jerk the steering wheel to the left in the direction of Martinez's vehicle, at which point the video jolts, and then this happens.
All right, out of the car. Be advised, we've been struck. Get out.
Right, that's Exum firing those 5 shots at Martinez's vehicle, and after she floors it out of there, you can hear bystanders screaming at them. With one agent explaining to another agent on the scene a few minutes later,
"Vehicle struck us twice. Then when we stepped out, she floored it and tried to run him over."
And then later in the afternoon, while Martinez was in the hospital being treated for several gunshot wounds, then Border Patrol Commander Greg Bavino sent Exum an email reading, "I would like to extend an offer to you to extend your retirement beyond age 57. In light of your excellent service in Chicago, you have much left to do." Meanwhile, you had Exum texting a group chat with his fellow agents labeled the Posse Chat, where they heap praise on him for his supposed heroism. Right, one writing, "You are a legend among agents, you better fucking know that. Beers on me when I see you at training." As well as another adding, "That's awesome, you did real good," with a heart eyes emoji. Though also I'll say it's not clear whether they knew what had really happened, because Exum said that he fired through Martinez's front windshield, not the back passenger window as she claimed. Right, which is important because, one would seem to suggest that he was in front of it as it came at him, while the other suggests he was back and off to the side. Also with this, you had Exum sharing a link to a news story headline, "Federal agents taunted Chicago woman to do something before shooting her," attorney claims, and then captioning that LMAO. Then in another message, someone asked him if the bosses had been supportive, and he replied, "Big time, everyone has been, including Chief Bovino, Chief Banks, Secretary Noem, and El Jefe himself, according to Bovino. Or with El Jefe there translating to the boss, which many have interpreted as meaning Donald Trump. And then, of course, there's the disgusting text message we saw last week where Exum wrote, "I fired 5 shots and she had 7 holes. Put that in your book, boys." And, for some added context, this guy's not some fresh hire. He's a 23-year-old veteran of the Border Patrol. And so, you start to think, what else has this guy done throughout his career that we don't know about? And also, for now, he hasn't been charged. In fact, Trump's DHS still maintains that Martinez is a domestic terrorist, even though the charges against her were dropped months ago. And of course, this is happening as the agents who shot Renee Good and Alex Preddy are also still free men, though there have been some people arrested. Or you've now got an Associated Press review out there finding at least 24 ICE employees and contractors who have been charged with crimes since 2020. And these are stories that are just crazy. You've got a detention facility official admitting that he grabbed a handcuffed detainee by the neck and slammed him into a wall last year. There's also another facility official who admitted to sexually abusing a detainee for 5 months last year while telling other detainees to act as lookouts. An assistant field office supervisor allegedly abused his girlfriend for years, fracturing her hip and nose, causing internal bleeding, and attempting to strangle her, with the judge calling him a volatile and violent individual. Then another ICE agent was found by local police passed out in a crashed car with his agency firearm on him. Then yet another ICE employee went to meet someone he thought was a 17-year-old prostitute and then discovered it was a sting, and he told the cops, "I'm ICE, boys." You also had a third agent being pulled over for driving drunk with his 2 kids in the car, and then he demanded to know whether one of the deputies arresting him was Haitian, and he threatened, "I'll run him once I get out of here, and if he's not legit, he's taking a ride back to Haiti." And then lastly, at least for right here, a deportation officer allegedly took cash bribes from bail bondsmen in exchange for removing ICE detainers that ICE had placed on their clients, targeting them for deportation. Now, many of these, they happened over the past year, others go further back, but you have experts warning that this kind of shit, it's likely just gonna get worse and worse, right? Arguing that by weakening oversight, shortening training, doubling its workforce, making its culture more aggressive, and arguing that agents have absolute immunity for their actions on duty, the Trump regime, they've just left the door wide open for abuse. And with all this, you had at least one group, the Jewish Democratic Council of America, trying to appeal directly to Donald Trump to end this madness. Or because you had them saying that they wanted to air a segment during one of Fox and Friends' ad breaks, since the president's known to watch it from the Oval Office. It starts with a voiceover saying federal agents are executing and terrorizing American citizens, detaining and tear gassing children, creating chaos, and then it cuts to Joe Rogan.
Are we really going to be the Gestapo? Where's your papers? Is that what we've come to?
And then the voiceover returns saying ICE are out of control. When the government kills Americans and lies about the victims to cover up the crime, it's not law and order and it's not leadership. Those responsible must be fired. President Trump, stop the abuse, investigate the killings. It's gone too far. And while CNN and MS Now are running those ads this week, reportedly Fox refused, offering no explanation to the group as to why. And so with that, you've got Trump just going even deeper into his echo chamber of Fox and Friends, Truth Social, AI slop, and whatever the fuck Stephen Miller is whispering in his ear. And then there's more we've got to dive into in just a minute. But first, let me thank a sponsor and say, have you ever hired someone who looked great on paper and then immediately just reminded you of that Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde scenario? Because hiring's basically like dating, except that the stakes, it feels higher. Red flags, they're quieter, and the group chat, it judges you harder. You ask the right questions early so you don't waste weeks realizing, oh no, this was a mistake. And that's exactly why today's sponsor, ZipRecruiter, is clutch when hiring. Right now, you can try it for free at ZipRecruiter.com/DeFranco. ZipRecruiter actually recommends smart screening questions to weed out bad fits fast instead of reading 400 resumes fueled by regret. Their matching technology doesn't just dump applicants on you, it actively finds people who tick your boxes. You can even filter for candidates who are recently active, meaning that they're not just open to work emotionally. And ZipRecruiter is the #1 rated hiring site on G2, which is like Yelp, but for not ruining your company. And bottom line, better questions lead to better hires and fewer how did this happen meetings. So ask key questions and hire faster with ZipRecruiter. 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day. So try it for free at ZipRecruiter.com/DeFranco or just scan that QR code. That's ZipRecruiter.com/DeFranco. Meet your match on ZipRecruiter. But then, diving back into the news, we've got to talk about how the Trump administration just moved to shut down the skies over a major American city for 10 days with zero warning, zero explanation, and then appeared to lie about why it happened. It all unraveled in just a few hours. So let's talk about what happened with El Paso, Texas. Right, because late last night, you had the FAA dropping a bombshell. They issued a temporary flight restriction over El Paso, Texas. So for the next 10 days, everything up to 18,000 feet and within a 10 nautical mile radius was off limits to all pilots, excluding Mexican airspace. And the accompanying notice to air missions, it did not mince words. It warned pilots who do not adhere to the following procedure may be intercepted, detained, and interviewed by law enforcement/security personnel. It said violators could face civil penalties or criminal charges, and then came the kicker. They said the United States government may use deadly force against the airborne aircraft if it is determined that the aircraft poses an imminent security threat. So naturally, people wanted to know, well, okay, what the hell is going on? And then the FAA's answer was just special security reasons. That's it, no other details. Now, they also issued a second restriction for Santa Teresa, New Mexico, which is a small community about 15 miles northwest of El Paso Airport, but the focus, it stayed on El Paso because, it's not just some small town. We're talking about the 23rd most populous city in America with roughly 700,000 residents. Then add in Ciudad Juarez, Juarez just over the border, I mean, you're looking at a metropolitan area of over 2 million people. El Paso's airport alone had nearly 3.5 million passengers last year. So when the airport posted on Instagram that all commercial, cargo, and general aviation flights were shut down through February 20th, you had people understandably confused and pissed off. Right? You know, to be fair, the FAA does issue temporary flight restrictions all the time for wildfires, hurricanes, a Super Bowl, stuff like that. But shutting down airspace over a major US city for 10 days with no explanation, that's highly unusual. And apparently, it's also pretty uncommon for these notices to go out without carve-outs for first responders and military aircraft. So with all this, you had a CNN correspondent covering aviation putting it bluntly this morning, saying a ban on all flights over a US city, including medevac and police helicopters, has no modern precedent. Even the post-9/11 restrictions and the ongoing ones over DC and New York were handled differently. Also, Congresswoman Veronica Escobar, whose district includes El Paso, released a statement saying, the highly consequential decision by the FAA to shut down the El Paso airport for 10 days is unprecedented and resulted in significant concern in the community. With her also adding that based on what her office gathered, there is no immediate threat to the community or surrounding areas, and that there was no advance notice provided to my office, the city of El Paso, or anyone involved in airport operations. And so she urged the FAA to immediately lift the restrictions, and actually, guess what? Shortly after, they did exactly that. You had the FAA announcing that the temporary closure was lifted, saying there is no threat to commercial aviation, all flights will resume as normal. Right, and then, around the same time, you had an unnamed Trump administration official telling reporters that the shutdown happened because Mexican cartel drones had breached the airspace, but the military, they dealt with it and everything was safe now. And you actually had Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy quickly echoing that version of events on social media, saying the FAA and DoD acted swiftly to address a cartel drone incursion, the threat has been neutralized, and there is no danger to commercial travel in the region. The restrictions have been lifted and normal flights are resuming. And so, you know, interesting story, except it started to unravel almost immediately. You had Congresswoman Escobar coming out and saying that cartel drones being the reason is not the information that Congress has been given. She also pointed out that there have been drone incursions from Mexico going back to as long as drones existed, saying, so this is nothing new. And, you know, she's right. Back in July, in fact, the deputy director of the Homeland Security Department's counter-drone program told Congress that 27,000 drones piloted by organizations hostile to law enforcement had flown within 500 meters of the border over just 6 months in 2024. 27,000. So if cartel drones were really the issue, why now? Why this specific response? And when you see sources, they started telling a very different story. You had the New York Times reporting that the shutdown had something to do with a test of new counter-drone technology by the military at a nearby army base. Then another person briefed by Trump officials backed this up, saying that the FAA's decision was prompted by concerns about the risks that this technology could pose to other aircraft in the area. And then other outlets just continued to confirm this account and then add to it. There was some reporting that the weapon being tested was a high-energy laser, and that because the Pentagon wanted to test it before the FAA was on board, the agency's administrator, Brian Bedford, decided to just close the airspace without alerting White House, Pentagon, or Homeland Security officials. And this is there have also been reports that what this anti-drone technology actually ended up being used against may have been a party balloon that had just been mistaken for a drone. So just to recap, the official story is cartel drones, we stopped them, all good, but the actual story appears to be that the military wanted to test anti-drone weapons and they didn't properly coordinate with anyone, and so the FAA panic shut down the entire city's airspace. So, you know, as far as the fallout, you've got local officials furious. El Paso Mayor Renard Johnson not holding back at a news conference.
I want to be very, very clear that this should have never happened. You cannot restrict airspace over a major city without coordinating with the city, the airport, the hospitals, the community leadership. That failure to communicate is unacceptable.
You know, this wasn't just an inconvenience. The mayor noted that surgical equipment destined for city hospitals just didn't show up. You had medical evacuation flights forced to divert to a city in New Mexico more than 40 miles away. And I mean, this is just from a few hours of shutdown. Imagine if this had gone on for 10 days. Now, with all of that said, I do think it's important that we talk about some of the bigger context here. The military isn't testing anti-drone tech at the border for no reason. Going back a decade, one of Mexico's major cartels started systematically using drones for surveillance, combat, and transport. Today, officials have documented cartel conflicts where drones are being used to carry and deploy up to 50 kilograms of explosives at once. So US officials are concerned that they might eventually target Americans or law enforcement in the border region, though so far it appears that the thousands of drones spotted near the US, they've been used for drug smuggling and surveillance, not attacks yet. But also, I'll say here is an ironic twist. When it comes to cartel violence, a lot of the weapons come from the United States. And in fact, this week, Mexico's defense secretary revealed that roughly half of the high-powered 50 caliber cartridges seized from cartels since 2012 can be traced back to an ammunition factory in Missouri, one that's also owned by the US government. It's an investigation by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, and the New York Times found that the ammo from that plant has become a staple for organized crime in Mexico and has even been used by mass shooters in the United States. Now, the Army has defended this by saying that commercial sales from the plant, they save taxpayers around $50 million annually by lowering the government's cost for ammunition. But also, it's not just ammunition. Right? You also had Mexico's defense secretary saying nearly 80% of weapons seized by the current administration came from the United States. The Mexican government actually sued major American gun makers lawmakers alleging that their business practices fueled violence in Mexico, though the Supreme Court threw that case out. Right, but all of this, it brings us back to why this story and this situation matters. It reveals a dangerous pattern. You've got a government taking extreme action with no transparency, no coordination with local officials, and then lying about why it happened. A major American city had its airspace shut down, affecting hospitals, emergency services, and hundreds of thousands of people because federal agencies couldn't be bothered to communicate properly. And then when caught, they just blamed cartel drones instead of admitting that it was one of their own weapons tests that caused the chaos. And then there's even more we've got to dive into in just a minute, but first let me thank a sponsor and say, lean in if your phone bill, it makes you sigh loudly every month, because this is for you. Today's sponsor, Mint Mobile, makes so much sense. They've rebuilt wireless to be simpler, online, and more reasonable. No stores, no sales counters, no awkward upsells. You sign up online and you're done. And right now, Mint's offering 50% off their unlimited plan, so you can lock in their lowest price ever, just $15 a month when you choose a 3, 6, or 12-month plan. Also, all plans include unlimited talk and text on the nation's largest 5G network, plus free calling to Mexico, Canada, and the UK. Hotspots included too, up to 20 gigabytes on unlimited plans, which is a must when working remotely. One of the things I love is the flexibility, right? You can pick the data that fits your life. 5 gigabytes, 15 gigabytes, 20 gigabytes, or unlimited. Also, switching's fast. Activate it in minutes with the eSIM right from your couch. Simple. And honestly, the value compared to most bills is wild, and all plans come with a 7-day unconditional money-back guarantee. So stop letting your wireless bill break your bank. Get this new customer offer and pay just $15 a month for a 3, 6, or 12-month plan. That's 50% off of an unlimited wireless plan at mintmobile.com/DeFranco. That's mintmobile.com/DeFranco, or scan that QR code. But then, diving right back into the news, the FBI thought they had their guy in the Nancy Guthrie kidnapping case. They raided his house, they detained him, the whole 9 yards. There's just one problem. He says he has no idea who Nancy Guthrie even is, and now this case just got a whole lot messier. So here's what went down. Yesterday, the Pima County Sheriff's Office detained a suspect during a traffic stop south of Tucson, and they questioned this guy about the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, the mother of Today Show host Savannah Guthrie, who vanished from her home over a week ago. Shortly after, he had the FBI launching a search at his home in Rio Rico, Arizona, about an hour south of Tucson, right near the Mexican border. And the timing, it seemed very significant because all of this happened just hours after the FBI released photos and videos of a potential suspect caught on camera at Nancy's door the night that she disappeared wearing a ski mask. And the footage reportedly generated a massive spike in tips, and so people were genuinely hopeful that this could be the break that investigators needed. But then things started to unravel. The homeowner, the suspect's mother-in-law, came out and told reporters that her son-in-law had nothing to do with this, saying he's just a delivery driver doing his job, and she flat out said, "No, that's not him. No, I can assure you that's not him." And then it was confirmed that the guy got released. And as far as his side of things, his name is reportedly Carlos, and he gave an interview to Telemundo where he explained that yes, the FBI searched his house with a warrant damaging both his front and back doors in the process. He also said that agents told him that he resembled the person in the footage that the FBI released, though he completely disagreed with that assessment. Right, Carlos insisting that he has nothing to do with Nancy's disappearance. He doesn't watch the Today Show, he doesn't know who Savannah Guthrie is, and he had zero clue her mom was even missing.
When they finally told you this had to do with some kidnapping, like what were you thinking?
What the am I doing here? I didn't do anything, to be honest. Like, I'm innocent. I mean, I hope they get the suspect. Because I'm not it. They better do their job and find the suspect that did it so they can clear my name.
Right, and Carlos also said he has no idea why the authorities were even interested in him. They gave him no details about whether it was his car, his license plate, or what triggered the investigation. Also, he said technically law enforcement didn't pull him over, instead saying that he noticed them following him and pulled over himself. Right, and also claiming that it took hours before his rights were even read to him. And while he said that he does deliver packages in Tucson for work, he can't recall if he's ever made a delivery to Nancy's home. Though for their part, as of this morning, you had county officials saying that he was questioned as, quote, part of follow-up on incoming leads. And so, naturally, this whole situation had sparked a lot of criticism of how the FBI has been handling things. Senator Chris Murphy, seeing Carlos's interview and tweeting, "The FBI, now run by online influencers, hair tonic salesmen, and talk show hosts, has become a shell of its former self. The next president is going to have an enormous job to rebuild it." But then last night, you had FBI Director Kash Patel pushing back on Fox News, suggesting that they were actually making progress.
I will say we have made substantial progress in these last 36, 48 hours thanks to the technical capabilities of the FBI and our partnerships. And I do believe we are looking at people who, as we say, are persons of interest.
And today we learned from the FBI that there's a search in the Catalina foothills area related to Nancy Guthrie, though we have no other information on that. But then it gets weirder, right? Because this morning, TMZ reported that they received a note from someone claiming to have information about the kidnapper in exchange for 1 Bitcoin. Now, TMZ, they emphasized here that the legitimacy is unclear, especially since multiple media outlets have already received alleged and unverified ransom notes throughout the case. But this sender claims that they've unsuccessfully tried to reach Savannah and her family. Right? If they want the name of the individual involved involved, then I want 1 Bitcoin to the following wallet. Time is more than relevant. And so now we're waiting to see what happens. Also, if any other outlets get similar notes and whether any of this is legitimate. And now, with all this, you have people really focused on the situation for 3 reasons. 1, of course, a woman is still missing, and every day that passes, it makes finding her safely even more difficult. 2, this botched detention, it raises serious questions about investigative procedures with Trump's FBI. Right, how someone gets their house raided and detained for hours only to be released with no clear explanation of why they were targeted in the first place. And also now 3, the emergence of potential ransom notes, right? Real or fake, it complicates an already tense situation and it can interfere with the actual investigation. But then next up from that, there's actually 2 big final things I want to hit on today. Right, and the first of the 2 is that we need to talk about how a Trump-appointed federal judge just delivered a massive blow to one of Trump's most aggressive power grabs yet. And 1, this is the 3rd time that the courts have actually told the administration to back the hell off. And 2, this is about way more than just voter rolls. Because last summer, the Trump DOJ began demanding that every state turn over complete voter rolls. And we're not talking about just basic information here. We're talking driver's license numbers, social security numbers, email addresses, phone numbers, party registrations, and full voter participation histories. And the Trump administration claimed that this was all part of a plan to centralize election data in a national voting database. That sounds reasonable enough on the surface, except here's the part they didn't advertise. According to a draft agreement obtained by the Brennan Center, the DOJ specifically said that it would conduct its own analysis of states' voter files and then order the states to remove specific voters from the rolls. And to be very clear here, that has never happened before. States, not the federal government, have the legal authority to add and remove voters. That is how it has always worked, and for good reason. You have many experts now raising serious concerns that the Trump administration is trying to improperly purge valid voters from the rolls to suppress Democratic votes and boost Republican chances in the elections. And that becomes even more concerning given that around 11 states have already complied or said that they will comply with these requests to hand over incredibly sensitive voter information. But I'll also say that the majority of states, both Democratic and Republican, have refused. You had the Trump DOJ doing what you'd expect. They sued over 20 states, most of which have Democratic governors, to try and force them to hand over the data. And so in the lawsuit against Michigan, you had the Trump DOJ arguing that it was entitled to know the personal information of Michigan voters to, quote, prevent the inclusion of ineligible voters and combat what it called voter fraud. But then yesterday, a federal judge in Michigan, who was actually appointed by Donald Trump, rejected those claims and dismissed the case. You had the judge ruling that there was no basis to seize these records under the federal laws that the DOJ used to justify its request. And the fact that this happened in Michigan is also especially notable. Right? Michigan is one of Trump's top targets in his efforts to overturn the 2020 election, and he's made it clear that the state is on his radar again for the upcoming midterms. Right? He's continually spread false claims about voter fraud in Michigan, even though he literally won the state himself in 2024. And in fact, more recently, he specifically called out Detroit while talking about nationalizing elections, claiming without any evidence that there are high levels of fraud there. But also, one of the things that's very significant here is that Michigan is now the 3rd federal court to shut down the DOJ's voter data grab. Or just last week, a federal judge in Oregon ruled against the DOJ, saying that he didn't trust the Trump administration to keep the sensitive data private. He also just didn't believe the administration's claims that it would only use the voter rolls for election administration, raising concerns that it would weaponize the information for immigration enforcement. And then actually, before that, another federal judge blocked the DOJ's efforts in California last month, ruling that the request was an unprecedented and illegal power grab meant to disenfranchise voters. You were the judge writing the foundation upon which American democracy has been built is the right to vote. Now it seems the executive branch of the United States government wants to abridge the right of many Americans to cast their ballots. And so, the fact that a 3rd judge, and no less a Trump appointee, has now ruled the same way, it shows this isn't a partisan issue. Multiple and politically diverse federal courts are saying the same thing. This is a legal overreach. And of course, all the while, there are still many other fronts in this battle. Right on top of all the other states that the DOJ has sued for refusing to turn over voter data, it's very possible that they're going to appeal these 3 decisions. And of course, the administration's not just relying on lawsuits. We've also had Attorney General Pam Bondi weaponizing other branches of the government to coerce states into compliance. Just last month, amid the Minnesota ICE takeover, Bondi sent Governor Tim Walz a letter demanding that he turn over voter data if he wanted to restore order in his state. A move that, of course, drew widespread backlash, and some experts described the letter as a ransom note, and others calling it blackmail. And so ultimately, this is something we're going to have to keep an eye on because it is a fundamental attack on how American elections work. The federal government has never had the power to unilaterally remove voters from state rolls, and for good reason. It is a system that is ripe for abuse. If the DOJ, whether it be Trump's DOJ or someone else's DOJ, can force states to hand over sensitive personal data and then decide who gets purged, that's not protecting election integrity. That is undermining it. But then, with all of that said, it brings us to the final thing that we should talk about today, and that is YouTube's lawyers just stood up in court and said with a straight face, we're not social media. Whether you buy that or not, this trial could completely reshape the internet as we know it and cost tech giants billions of dollars. Because we're watching the kickoff of a massive landmark trial centered around a now 20-year-old woman identified by her initials KGM, who's accusing Meta and YouTube of building addictive platforms that hooked her at a very young age and destroyed her mental health. Now, it's also worth noting that this suit originally included Snap and TikTok as well, but they actually managed to avoid trial by reaching settlements under undisclosed terms. So now we're left with Meta and YouTube in the hot seat. Now, as far as the specifics of the lawsuit, it alleges that Meta and YouTube made calculated design choices, infinite scroll, autoplay, algorithmic recommendations, specifically to make these apps more addictive to kids and boost their own profits. And during the trial, KGM's lawyers did not pull punches, calling Meta and YouTube digital casinos intentionally designed to get children and teens addicted, where they claim that the platforms have engineered addiction in children's brains and argued that tech executives knew the risks and said they didn't just build apps, they built traps. They didn't want users, they wanted addicts. It's a pretty damning language, but here's what makes it interesting. Lawyers for the tech companies are claiming that KGM's mental health issues were caused by her difficult family life, not social media. And they're denying that their products intentionally harm children, pointing to safeguards that they've enacted in recent years and arguing that there is no scientific evidence proving that their apps cause addiction. They're also notably leaning on federal law, claiming that it shields them from liability for content posted on their platform. But also maybe the wildest part, YouTube's lawyers are trying to distance themselves from Meta by arguing that YouTube isn't even a form of social media, where they're claiming that YouTube's actually an entertainment platform that more closely resembles Netflix and Facebook. They say that it's different because people use it for streaming helpful videos, not endless scrolling. Right? And one lawyer pushed back on claims that YouTube's algorithm drives addiction by saying it's not trying to get in your brain and rewire it, it's just asking what you like to watch. So with that, you've had many pushing back, saying that YouTube has comments, community posts, subscriptions, notifications, an algorithm that absolutely keeps you watching, and a shorts feature that literally is designed to compete with TikTok. But also a big factor here is that this isn't just a one-off lawsuit. Right? This is just the first to go out to trial out of thousands of similar lawsuits alleging that social media platforms deliberately addicted adolescents and caused personal injury or other harms. And all four tech giants, Meta, YouTube, Snap, and TikTok, they're named in various combinations across those other cases. And actually, they're all relying on a novel legal claim that these apps can be as addictive and as harmful as cigarettes. These cases are specifically drawing from the legal strategy used against big tobacco in the 1990s, where plaintiffs argued that cigarette makers knew how harmful their products were, but hid that information from the public. And that strategy there, it worked. Those cases totally upended the tobacco market. Cigarette companies reached a $206 billion master settlement and agreed to stop marketing to minors, which paved the way for strict tobacco regulations and a massive decline in smoking. And now, with KGM's suit being the first to go to trial, it's being seen as a massive test case that could determine how thousands of other similar cases play out. And so if this case swings in her favor, it could trigger a cascading effect similar to big tobacco, potentially putting tech firms on the hook for billions of dollars in damages and forcing them to completely redesign their platforms. I mean, we're talking about potentially revolutionizing or destroying, depending on your point of view, the entire industry. And all the while, there's a lot of debate happening out there about whether social media is actually as harmful as tobacco. The science is still developing and the comparisons, they're not perfect. But what's not debatable is that these platforms are designed to maximize engagement, and that engagement equals profit. But whether that crosses the line into deliberate harm, especially when it comes to children, that is exactly what this trial is trying to determine. And YouTube's claim, that it's not social media, it does feel more like a legal maneuver more than reality, where the platform's evolved way beyond just posting videos. The algorithm doesn't just ask what you like to watch. It learns your patterns. It serves you content based on what keeps you engaged the longest and uses psychological triggers to keep you coming back. But it seems like someone could easily argue that's not passive entertainment, that's active engagement optimization. But, with all that, this is the Philip DeFranco Show. Yes, it's a news show, but it's also a conversation. So in addition to you leaving thoughts, comments, reactions to any of the news that stood out to you today, for this news specifically, do you think tech platforms are genuinely addictive in a way that causes harm, or is this placing too much blame on the companies for individuals and family issues? And also, do you buy YouTube's argument that it is not social media? But that, my friends, you beautiful bastards, brings us to the end of your Wednesday Philip DeFranco Show. Another daily dive into the news in the books. And well, of course, I want to say I love yo faces. And of course, I'll see you right back here tomorrow. There's even more that you can watch right now. A brand new episode of my podcast, Crashing Out, just went out today, and it was a ride.
Bad Bunny says he's gonna wear a dress. Bad Bunny's not gonna sing in English. He's a foreigner.
I love to be like, I hope that I can age like you when it's very obvious that they've had plastic surgery.
She looked in the camera and said, all the cool people are going. I'm like, you should be banned from schools.
If you were involved or you knew and you did nothing, we allow abuse survivors to get a rock and get a throw in.